Well, hello everyone. And thank you so much for coming to today's webinar. Um, I think we'll get started now. My name's Dave. I Charlton. I work at the college in a business development capacity. Um, we're joined also today by Robin McMillan, who runs the MarTech clubs for us. The session is on the Bumble Fumble, which I was having a read around, which looks really interesting. Robin does a lot of tutoring work for the college, and also helps organisations and individuals sort of understand their marketing data and demystify MarTech. And make complicated things more accessible. It'll be a really interesting talk today. Just before we get started, just to make you aware that these are recorded um, just for sort of quality purposes. Just wanted to make you aware of that before we get started. I'll hand over to Robin now. But yeah, please do type in any questions in the Q&A section as well, and I'll keep an eye out on that. Thanks so much, Robin.
Okay. As always, a glorious introduction to who I am and why I do these kind of things. But today we are basing the need for MarTech directly into something that was so visible, so tangible, and so cringeworthy, and that was the Bumble Fumble. And we're going to be looking at how actually MarTech could and should have saved the day for these organizations and those kind of individuals who are part of this kind of full rebrand. So does anybody notice the Bumble Fumble? Did you read about it in the news or anything like that? Let me know, because it was incredibly visible, and I will explain why it was and why they truly missed the mark of their sentiment of their ideal client, their user base. Since April, like last year when it started, they realistically alienated most of their target demographic and the reason that they started this in the first place. So let's have a look. Let's have a deep dive into this kind of journey today. As always, if you have a question, you have a thought, you have an idea of how you would have done this better, please put that in the notes, because that is what I want to talk about. How could we have changed the outcome for Bumble if we'd have thrown in some of those glorious MarTech kind of processes in the kind of decisions that they made for this? So today we're going to look at how MarTech could have saved the day from this rebrand gone astray. And we're going to illustrate how this crucial tool that we have access to as marketers could have prevented missteps, could have kind of looked at the complex rebranding efforts and ensured that realistically the campaigns that went along with that truly resonated positively with the intended audience, because that was a key downfall here. The rebrand came from a wonderful place. It was a decision. It was a movement to unify their world. But in reality, they caused themselves many detriments towards the end of the rebrand. So let's look a little bit now at Bumble's story. So it is the month of Valentine's Day. And once upon a time, in the vast and swirling world of online dating, a bright yellow bee, the bumblebee, buzzed onto the scene, and they had big dreams and an even bigger heart. And the app was Bumble. And they weren't just any dating app. They had a uplifting tale and kind of personality of empowerment, and they wanted to shout it from the rooftops in the sea of what we traditionally understand as online dating. And in this kingdom, this world of these kind of apps that were ruled by swipes, silent profiles, Bumble was daring to be incredibly different. And they believed in giving power to women to decide who they wanted to talk to, which was very different within the traditional kind of dating app kind of structure. And they wanted to offer a different alternative to that usual rhetoric that we had just just become known to kind of understand. So change that boy likes girl, boy sends message storyline and level the playing field. And they wanted to consider themselves as a modern twist on this classic kind of stereotype that kind of happened. And they did it incredibly well. Yeah. They tore in, they had all of these ideals, and they lived and breathed their brand personality. And their brand stood out for a few key reasons from a marketing kind of perspective, not just a MarTech perspective. And they had women at the helm. So unlike many other dating apps, Bumble's whole brand identity gave women the reins. Yeah. And that women make the first move kind of ethics, their ethos, isn't just a user experience quirk for Bumble. It was the core of their story. Yeah. And that female first positioning redefined the dating app dynamic. So not only were they really good at knowing who they were, why they did it, and how they did it, they were also disrupting a sector with the way they positioned themselves and the user experience of Bumble. And it felt more equal and less chaotic. It didn't have those murky kind of stereotypes that are felt within some kind of other dating apps. So that woman at the helm positioning really made them stand out. And that's important to note as we talk about the issues that were faced after the rebrand. They had this beautiful, bold, bright color palette, signature sunshine yellow, shouting optimism as soon as you downloaded the app. And while most dating apps leaned on cooler, more minimalist, kind of subdued hues, Bumble's bold palette at the time was symbolic of its vibrancy and its attitude of confidence. We're here to stand out and celebrate and change the way that we do this incredibly loudly. Yeah. They were also incredibly empowered and positive. They don't just talk the talk. The whole app, the whole rhetoric, the whole social media, the whole marketing campaigns it used focused on body positive, uplifting, feminist leaning, almost kind of a total U-turn on the kind of expectations people decided that dating apps had, like the stereotypes that are often integrated with this kind of sector. They championed respectful behavior and prioritized user safety. So these were values that truly resonated with users that were craving a more genuine and supportive environment. Now, I am married, and the way I met my husband was we knew each other from college, went off into the world, and then reconnected like some years later. But if I was to go back into the dating world, I would lean towards a place that valued my safety, that shouted about positivity, and gave me the opportunity to be in the driving seat, which is generally a male-dominated kind of space. So of course, it did well. Yeah. They had this idea of the multi-purpose kind of hive. So rather than just being another swipe right dating app, which is the model that so many are based upon, Bumble created this space to meet not only your partners, but also your friends and your professional connections. And this approach pivoted Bumble from a one-dimensional kind of dating brand to a broader ecosystem where community, collaboration, and connection share the top of that bill. Yeah, they were all equal. And then another way that they kind of identified themselves was with this B kind of identity, this kind of hive kind of iconography. And this was the way that the entire brand tapped into that hive, making the first move, and pollination as a metaphor for spreading those good vibes. Yeah, it's cute, fun, playful, a little cheeky, a little bit memorable, and it helped Bumble feel light-hearted rather than overly serious or transactional. So you put all those elements together and you get a brand that's fresh, forward-thinking. They use the phrase happily buzzing with confidence. It wrote its own love story, yeah? One defined by equality, authenticity, and a whole lot of heart. That was what allowed Bumble to slice a big wedge out of this very saturated, this is the way that we do this kind of market. So they were doing pretty well, right? Yeah. They were making waves, making statements, all that kind of thing, doing it in their way, retaining those core values and those purposeful ways that they wanted to do this within that sector. And then the wave of the rebrand came in. So this happened kind of April last year. And it did not go the way that they expected to. And I would go as far as to say that Bumble is still trying to come back from this. Yeah. Because the people that were attracted and kind of into this world were suddenly met with the issues of the rebrand. Did anyone notice the rebrand? Did you go through it yourself on the app? Did you see any of the marketing campaigns or the ads? Because as I've kind of deep delved into this, I realized I saw some ads and went, oh, really? And it was actually Bumble, a brand that I have actually championed and heard wonderful things from my friends at the time. So the reasonings for the rebrand were pretty solid. Yeah. Bumble had always been known for its bold, bee-inspired branding. But like many growing companies, it needed a refresh to reflect how much it had evolved, because actually it had evolved much beyond that dating app kind of title. While Bumble never abandoned its bright yellow identity, there was a strategic rebrand and brand refresh to bring consistency and clarity across its offerings. Yeah, so we had Bumble Date, Bumble BFF, and Bumble Biz. And here's a kind of rundown of what happened, why it happened, and the main changes that you will have experienced as a consumer. So why did it actually happen? They wanted to broaden beyond dating, which is a solid reason to do a rebrand, really. It's why you would start one in the first place. Your identity that you had, you feel that it doesn't actually reflect the identity that you have now. Yeah. And Bumble was no longer just this dating app. It had grown into a platform, a whole hive of unity for friendship and professional working too. And they needed a way to kind of showcase this visual and verbal identity that encapsulated all three modes of the kind of app in a cohesive way, moving it towards the idea that Bumble was all about meaningful kinds of connection and communication. Yeah, so that's one reason. I don't disagree. They were maturing as a brand. They scaled rapidly, wanted to refine that playful, empowering personality it already had. And the goal was to keep that warmth and optimism while introducing more kind of polished and consistent design principles. They were incredibly organic in the way that they connected on social and things like that. And they wanted something that would resonate with a wide and increasingly global audience. They wanted to establish clear consistency. So over time, Bumble had added new features, launched new campaigns, partnered with many organizations. And with any type of growth within any organization, that growth came with challenges of maintaining brand harmony. A rebrand, they deemed, would ensure that whether someone was using Bumble Date, BFF, or Biz, or seeing an ad on social media, they'd instantly know it was Bumble, which they felt they hadn't achieved before now. Now, as a warning, some of the content in the kind of marketing campaigns isn't particularly tasteful. So just as you read these, just as a warning for those. So what actually happened during the rebrand? They developed this unified visual system. So if we look at the colors, the color change was slight but noticeable. Yeah. Bumble held on to its iconic yellow but refined the palette with updated secondary colors to help differentiate the 3 user modes. So the modes, like I say, were dating, friendship, and networking. And they aimed to create a clean, modern look across all those platforms. And then they altered the shapes and the motifs. So the honeycomb that we traditionally saw, this one here, became more stylized and minimalist. So that's what you can see now on these ones. And was used in more unified ways, so no more inconsistent hexagon shapes or placement. They refined their typography, updated to be bolder, yet more minimal, making sure Bumble's text was easily and instantly recognizable and easy to read. They had clean, modern fonts, replaced any older ones that felt inconsistent with the brand's forward-thinking vibe. They then added into the rebrand this idea of a clearer, more empowering voice. So Bumble has always been about female empowerment and respectful interactions, but the rebrand solidified a tone of voice that felt, to them, more friendly, confident, and uplifting across every point of contact. So this was push notifications, blog posts, social media, email. The messaging emphasized Bumble's core belief, they thought, make the first move, and showed how it applies beyond romance, taking initiative in friendships, professional connections, and life in general. So how do you feel when you see those kind of ads? Yeah. Yeah, they're very intense, not the greatest kind of tonality. I didn't really understand what this one meant because low intervention chilled reds really aren't personality. It was very juxtaposing to the environment and the feelings that they had created before this. And the biggest takeaways from the kind of rebrand was that it was more than just swapping out logos or picking a prettier font. It was their strategic move to communicate Bumble's expanded offerings, Date, BFF, and Biz, in a unified and powerful way. They wanted to preserve the playful, welcoming essence of Bumble while maturing its presence in the competitive landscape of social networking apps. It all boiled down to them wanting to refine their core mission of empowering spaces for all kinds of connections. So just from that kind of thing, how do you feel about that rebrand? What does the differences here feel like to you? I mean, for me, I do think that they really tried hard to be down with the cool kids, and kind of create something that could be maybe put onto clothing, all that kind of stuff, and worn as a statement piece. But it didn't go down very well. There was an immediate negative reaction, and the aim of these changes and their updates to their brand, their app, was supposed to address the frustration and exhaustion that women felt online whilst in the dating space. And it really fell flat on its face. So it came from a wonderfully good place, them wanting to do X, Y, and Z to do X, Y, and Z. But in reality, their core user base, who they had built this world, this app for, had an immediate knee-jerk reaction to these changes. So the first thing that was frustrating for their kind of audiences was that they abandoned their core differentiator. So Bumble had always stood out for allowing women to make the first move. This unique feature set it apart in the crowded dating scene, and it was supposed to be a safer place for women looking to date. And one of the things they brought in was that with this rebrand was something called opening moves, which was an evolution of this founding feature. And this moved women away from the driving seat. It was a significant shift. And this was immediately pointed out, and any rebranding needs to honor and preserve what makes your brand special. Straying too far from your core identity can push away loyal users and water down what makes your brand great. Bearing in mind, Bumble had come in as this bright, colorful bee that was buzzing around and disrupting the dating game, all of a sudden included a new process, opening moves, that shifted that power in a different way. So a key thing here is that when planning a rebrand, make sure your main differentiator remains the heart of your new strategy. Yeah, they kind of lost themselves at this point. There was a significant failure to listen to users overall. It might sound obvious and like marketing 101, but understanding your audience goes deeper than just surface level assumptions. So in this case, the teaser campaign initially hit the mark by tapping into the frustrations of women in modern dating. But when the update and the rebrand was actually revealed, users were quick to point out that that didn't really provide a meaningful solution to the exhaustion that they'd aimed to overcome. It didn't even come close to fixing any of the current complaints, issues, or feelings or problems that the main user base had with Bumble. A rebrand really does have to align with the genuine needs and desires of your audience, steering clear of any missteps that might push them away. Otherwise, it becomes simply a stunt. A lot of exaggeration, a lot of overpromise, and not anything in the delivery. There was a focus on superficial changes. So there were slight tweaks to fonts, colors, but they were only slight. And while there's nothing wrong with an aesthetic refresh, they didn't change or kind of follow through with the problems that people were reporting and what triggered the rebrand. Does your audience really care that you're changing your logo to a slightly different color? No. But they are going to care if you're ignoring deeper issues or failing to improve the user experience when you let them know that this is what the rebrand is for. So in a rebrand overall, you should concentrate on substantial improvements that bring real value. Think about what meaningful changes you can make that will genuinely enhance your products and service. And of course, the biggest thing that they promised was to remove exhaustion within the dating scene. So that's going to create a lot of hype. It's a big promise. And one of the biggest traps that can happen in rebranding is making these big promises and then not delivering. Yeah. Bumble's marketing campaign promised a revolutionary change. Yeah. Creating high anticipation among many of their users, many of their user bases. But the actual rebranding and update fell short, causing disappointment and a huge feeling of letdown. And it can make your brand look desperate and erode trust. So if you are going to build up this excitement, make sure that your promotion, your rebranding matches the level of what's going to be revealed. Be transparent and realistic about what you're planning to deliver. And while we love doing things big, they really wanted to go in big with this. It's still important to set clear, achievable expectations with your audience. So it failed on many key areas. It felt like they had abandoned their core difference, the reason people loved them in the first place. People felt like they were not listened to. It was a superficial change. It didn't get to the root, the promises that were given. And of course, there was a feeling of undeliverment. So people felt like they did not receive the kind of beautiful, glowy updates that they expected. And that's terrifying to have to go through. Alongside this, so their rebranding, their app updates that didn't kind of hit the mark, they also had a very bad time with a marketing campaign, which I will send out the link so you can watch this video. And alongside not quite hitting the mark or understanding kind of their processes with this, Bumble's attempt to woo users into this new Bumble world and promote its new features, its rebrand, didn't go as planned. So there was this 30-second ad, which is now actually unlisted, where a woman decides to become a nun and swears off dating. She goes on the bus to the nunnery and she isn't really enjoying it. And then she spots a beautiful gardener. And she's tempted back into the dating scene by a shirtless gardener and a phone with Bumble installed. And the ad, along with billboard slogans stating things like, you know full well a vow of celibacy is not the answer, and thou shalt not give up dating and become a nun, again, failed to resonate and sparked significant backlash. So very, very quickly, some of the backlash was things like the campaign's portrayal of celibacy and use of religious references quickly drew criticism. They were classed as tone deaf and misogynistic, as it appeared to condemn women for not engaging in casual relationships with men, for example. Many felt the ads were dismissive of a growing trend of voluntary celibacy, a decision increasingly popular among women at the time who were frustrated with hookup culture and negative dating experiences. There was many social media influences. I tried to put that into one word there. And actress Julia Fox voiced their disapproval, criticizing the campaign for targeting women and not addressing men at all. Bumble is supposed to be a woman-friendly dating app, and these ads are literally telling women how to date and what to do with their body. People were sharing their positive experience with celibacy on TikTok as a response to Bumble's offensive marketing campaign, stating 2.5 years celibate and never been better. And all this highlights how the campaign completely disregarded the valid reasons many women opt to use Bumble in the first place. Yeah. So where did we end up from here? So the rebrand didn't go particularly well. The the updates to the app that they aimed and spoke about in the rebrand and the changes fell short, and the marketing campaigns were tone deaf and received incredible backlash. It's a 3 for 3 in the wrong kind of way. So from a brand that had originally had all of this positivity and empowerment and growth and this wonderful user base, suddenly made them feel not seen, not understood, not heard, not valued within Bumble's choices. And realistically, we got to the point where an apology was kind of had to be offered to the people who had interacted with these things and become impacted by this brand's kind of rebranding and content. And when a brand has to apologize for something it has done, it's a very slippery slope from there. So they were aware of this serious misstep, right? They swiftly offered an apology through an Instagram post. Bless me. The company also removed the controversial ad, the one that I'll send out to you, from YouTube and took down the associated billboards. In its statement, Bumble acknowledged that the campaign had, albeit unintentionally, alienated a significant portion of its users. They realized that they'd screwed up. And it was particularly those who chose celibacy for personal safety, for example, for recovering from trauma, reproductive considerations. And they failed to notice that this could be a problem. And in an effort to demonstrate accountability, Bumble pledged donations to the National Domestic Violence Hotline and several other organizations. And the company further committed its remaining billboard space to these groups, enabling them to spotlight issues, causes that align more closely with the community's values. It's a bit too late, really. And despite these measures, a number of users remained dissatisfied. They lost 38% of their active user base. And Bumble now faces the considerable challenge of rebuilding trust among its user base. So what do you think happens when a brand has to issue such an apology? Has to admit they got it so wrong, or they failed to see how their new content alienated almost half of their active user base. It's hard to come back from. And for me, as a marketer, and the fact that we have so much marketing technology and data available to us, it seems that they failed to do basic kind of MarTech kind of processes where they could have really seen the disenchantment, the disassociation, the unhappiness that these individuals would experience when they started this process. So how could MarTech have saved the day? Is there anything that you would have done differently? Because realistically, there's 5 things that this brand could have done to gauge the interest in this. They didn't even need to rebrand, potentially. So the first way that MarTech could have saved the day is that they could have done advanced social listening and sentiment analysis. Yeah. So these are our wonderful tools like Brandwatch, Sprout Social, or Talkwalker. There's many more. But it's anything basically that monitors social media platforms, blogs, or forums to gauge public sentiment in real time. Yeah. So how it helps. So you could have done things like a pre-campaign pulse check. So before launching the ad or rebrand visuals, Bumble's marketing team could have used sentiment analysis to evaluate how users and the public might react to these new concepts. They may have had everybody's best interest at heart, but the way it was processed was not the best, especially around things like celibacy, safety, and things like that. We can gauge and understand. And if a negative sentiment or confusion was detected early in those focus groups or small test releases, the campaign message could have been reeled back in for its own rebrand and update before sending it out into the world. It could have been tweaked, scrapped before exposing that message to that large group of people. So that's one really easy way. Set up a tool to gauge what your kind of people are talking about, test a small ad and see what the response is. Yeah, especially in checking like this kind of ad, or the ones where the terminology, thou shalt not give up on dating and become an up. May you never feign interest in crypto again. And just truly recognize or begin to understand what people actually want to see and hear, or what could be a potentially negative thing to release out into the world about your app. They could have done comprehensive A/B, even C testing. And this is testing those different versions with a smaller segment of the audience before a large scale launch. And how it helps is that targeted pilot campaigns, so Bumble could have shown different ads to mini cohorts, like users who've indicated an interest in safer dating measures or reproductive health, for example, to gauge these emotional responses. So if group A negatively reacts to certain copy about X, while group B is neutral, Bumble can instantly see that that phrasing might be problematic. And then the brand can then revise wording, visuals, disclaimers, preventing backlash in the broader community. Yeah, because we're looking at the community as a whole, realistically. We then have things like user segmentation and personalization platforms. And these are our wonderfully large MarTech tools like HubSpot, Marketo, Segment, that allow marketers to slice audiences by demographics, behaviors, and preferences, and then deliver customized messages moving forward. So how does this help? Instead of a one-size-fits-all message, which is what happened, everything went out to everybody. So everybody was impacted by all of the content. Bumble could and should tailor content for users who have different relationship goals or boundaries. And if, for example, Bumble knows a portion of its audience includes people that choose celibacy, for example, the rebrand or messaging could include an empowering nod to those choices, or exclude certain campaigns for that group altogether. And this respects user preferences and pitfalls and avoids, bless me again, avoids alienating them, because that is exactly what happened. People read the content in a certain way, which created a certain response. Yeah. And then with anything like this, it gained momentum because other people were frustrated and angered that that was being showcased, even in any setting, let alone an app that was built for women to understand and be more powerful in the dating scene, right? And we like, as users, content that is personalized to us. Yeah, we like being seen. We like when our preferences, our wants and needs are kind of understood. by brands. So if I had chosen celibacy, or I'd experienced a form of trauma, and I would not want to be shown content that glorified that or used it in X, Y, and Z. Yeah. And of course, there are limitations, and it depends how somebody allows you access to their data when kind of creating these ads. But an attempt is better than not, or the realization that through comprehensive A/B testing, through kind of sentiment listening, it wasn't appropriate. It could have been removed and altered and changed. So that's all how user segmentation and personalization could have helped to save the day. We then have things like feedback loops and real-time analytics dashboards. So these are things like Google Analytics, Mixpanel, or Amplitude that give instant feedback on user interactions, signups, uninstalls, campaign click-through rate. This would help because it would showcase immediate red flags. Yeah. If an ad campaign leads to a spike in users deleting the app or unsubscribing from things like emails, it is a clear signal that something is off. Yeah. And Bumble's marketing teams could have set up a real-time key performance indicator alert. For instance, if account deletions exceed a campaign threshold within a set time, the campaign automatically pauses. This would minimize the fallout before it reaches crisis levels. They let it go on for a very long time. They kind of just bumbled along with it. Excuse the pun. And then another MarTech integration that you can kind of look into avoiding something like this is adding in collaborative content management and approval workflows. I'm going to sneeze one more time, I think. That's me. So a CMS, or a project management tool that includes stakeholder review, legal checks, and brand consistency, helps to give you a centralized oversight. So marketing, legal, product, user advocacy teams collaborate in the one environment. So every piece of content, from billboard designs to social copy, goes through a multi-layer approval process with clear sign-offs. So let's give an example. So before the ad campaign could go live, it would automatically route through sensitivity reviews, ensuring language about lifestyle choices, like celibacy, for example, like the ads that we've had a look at today, is respectful and supportive. If concerns crop up, the content doesn't pass the gate, preventing public blunders. So that's the fifth way that MarTech could have come in and supported and helped within these kind of processes. So it didn't need to be as negative as it turned out to be. And what are the lasting issues with a failed rebrand, do you think? Have you experienced this with other brands? But one of the biggest things is loss of consumer trust and why it lasts. So when a rebrand feels disingenuous, rushed, or out of sync with core values, customers may see it as a betrayal or a sign of internal chaos. Once that trust is shaken, it can take a long time and a lot of effort to rebuild. Future campaigns or changes might be met with skepticism, reducing overall marketing effectiveness and stalling brand momentum. You put your hand up there, Dave. Did you have something to add?
No, I didn't. Sorry, I did it by mistake. Sorry about that.
That's not a problem. And then another issue is that we end up with brand confusion and identity crisis. And why that lasts is that if the new look or messaging creates confusion about what the company stands for, consumers just disengage. And the real world effect is that a muddled brand identity can hurt every single touch point, from social media to customer support, making the brand appear inconsistent and unprofessional. And then there's a negative association and a backlash. So public outcry, media coverage, and social media outlash. It's a negative narrative that is suddenly part of your brand's rhetoric. Even after the brand reverts or corrects its misstep, that negative memory can linger. Financial and operational fallout. It's expensive to do a rebrand in the first place. So having to backtrack or change again, it's just doubling those expenses. You can also demoralize your internal team and have huge disalignment. So when employees are so invested in this and it goes badly, you kind of end up with reduced collaboration and reduced trust among employees, and that slows internal processes. The world is an incredibly fast place. So then we all of a sudden end up with competitive disadvantage because your competitors can take your mistakes and do better, right? And then also the rebrand stigma. So a flopped rebrand can develop a sort of internal fear factor around future branding changes. So teams, users, consumers become overly cautious, and the brand risks stagnation, missed opportunities to innovate, collaborate, or resonate with emerging consumer trends, ultimately pushing yourself back in a fast-paced market overall. And a failed rebrand can haunt a company long after the initial wave of criticism passes, and that's what's happening with Bumble. From mistrust and public backlash to financial strain and internal discord, really, the repercussions can be far-reaching and incredibly deep. And that's why careful planning, testing, and alignment with core values are essential to prevent this from happening to you, your brand, your clients, your communities. Yeah. And we don't want it to do more harm than good, because the rebrand came from a great place for Bumble. Yeah, it wasn't a rubbish reason to go forward with it. It was just not quite right. So what would you have done differently? What would you have done better? Which out of those MarTech kind of processes would you have chosen to try not let this happen if you had hindsight, of course? But I think the biggest one for me is, let's go back to this one, is social listening. If they had listened to what was being spoken about within their communities, I think they would have much of a better opportunity to not alienate with their rebrand. And I think that's the one way they could have really altered these kind of outcomes for Bumble. So as you can see, MarTech has a real way to help you to avoid these kind of missteps within your choices moving forward, because the more informed we are, the better the outcome we have as marketers. So that's it for me today. And I want you to go and think about how you can do those 5 very simple things. You probably already have those tools to avoid this for your brand in the future.
Thank you so much, Robin. That was really, really interesting. If anyone does have any questions, please use the Q&A section, and I'll sort of make sure those are answered here. I can see also Robin's popped up the list of the CIM accredited awards that we do at the college as well. If you're interested in MarTech, these are some of the sort of shorter courses you can undertake with us to gain qualifications in these areas as well. Does anyone have any questions? I've got a couple, Robin, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course.
Just in regards to sort of the timescale that this happened over, were they doing anything like feedback, or did it all happen sort of quite quickly? Was the offline stuff going out at the same time as the sort of video, like the billboards and things as well?
Yes, it was like a bottle of champagne. So the idea happened, and then it just fizzed and fizzed and fizzed, and then stopped because of the reaction, right?
Yeah.
It was all well and good until they actually got the response back. From what I can see, Bumble has generally been incredibly connected to its user base. Realistically, this was odd. This change, this swing came from a good place. The reasoning for the rebrand, it just wasn't executed in the way it needed to be. And a 38% drop in a user base is huge.
Yeah.
And realistically, most of those would have been women, realistically. So
Were they using an agency for that, or was it was it an internal sort of marketing team that had?
I think there was consultants that kind of came in, gave their 2 pence, but as with every big change, it's down to the organization to go forward or not. And they just lost sight of the reason that they kind of started in the first place, really. It's like they didn't try it before they bought it, if that makes sense, overall. So it was quite intense. It was a big change.
Yeah. Oh dear. Well,
Yeah.
thank you. It was very interesting. Yeah, it's a really good example. Yeah, especially how it can have such an impact on the sort of like user rate in that short amount of time. That's a
Yeah.
huge sort of drop off. What I'll do is I'll also just pop in the inquiries in the chat area here. I'll pop in our email address if anyone does have any questions following on from this about sort of any of the courses that we offer here as well. Sorry, Robin, I haven't done one of these in a while. I'm not 100% sure what that QR code links to. Is it?
Yeah, of course. So we have a MarTech club alongside kind of the live webinars, and it's just in a Slack channel, and it's where we can ask questions. You can talk to each other about the differences and the changes that are going on within MarTech. I also drop all my slides and my notes in there, so you can take them away and kind of have a second go through of that. And all the recordings do end up on YouTube if you do want to go back and kind of deep dive into some of the topics we've done before.
Perfect. Thank you. Well, yeah, I can't see that any other sort of questions are cropping up here. I mean, if anyone does want me to activate their microphone or anything like that, you can raise your hand as well, or sort of type it in the Q&A. But yeah, just for now, thank you so much, Robin. That was a really interesting example of where it hadn't sort of gone, a rebrand hadn't gone particularly well.
Sadly not.
Yeah.
It was such a good company that was trying to do different, and it just got a little bit lost along the way.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Robin.
Not a problem. And I've answered all the questions that I got privately in a chat to me.
Perfect.
So yeah, and if you do have any more questions, you can always put them into the MarTech Club. It's a free to join Slack channel.
Lovely. Thank you again.